You won't believe what happened the moment I slammed the door in his face. I never thought one decision could tear my family apart. I'd spent the morning rearranging throw pillows and wiping dust off the coffee table, trying to ignore the pit in my stomach. My sister, Emma, had called me at 6 a.m., voice trembling, begging me to let her ex-boyfriend, Jake, crash at my place for a few nights. "He has nowhere else to go," she'd said. "Please, just until he finds an apartment." Normally, I'd have agreed. After all, he was family by association. But something about the way she'd asked, something in the desperation of her plea, set off alarms in my head. I knew what Jake was capable of. I'd seen the debts he racked up, the doors he slammed in other people's faces, the way he faded in and out of responsibility like a ghost. And yet Emma was pleading because she still cared or because she felt guilty for breaking up with him. I could never decide which. When he arrived at my door 30 minutes later, disheveled hair, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, an awkward half-smile plastered on, my pulse kicked into overdrive. We'd all lived together 2 years ago. I knew every corner of his temper, every crack in his charm. "Hey," he said, voice low. "Long time no see." I exhaled before opening the door. "This is temporary," I warned, narrowing my eyes. He didn't answer. He stepped in, uninvited, and dropped his bag by the couch. "Thanks," he muttered. "Look, I'm doing you a favor here. You stay for 3 nights, tops. After that, I expect you out." He shrugged. "Fine." But the way he said it made it clear he thought 3 days would stretch into 3 weeks. That afternoon, I ran errands while he lounged on the couch, scrolling through his phone. Emma called again. "He's there?" she whispered. "Yes," I snapped, "but let me do my job. He leaves Saturday." She sighed. "Okay." On Thursday evening, I arrived home to find the living room trashed. Empty beer bottles, pizza boxes, my grandmother's knitted blanket shredded on the floor. Jake sat among the chaos, a beer in hand, watching reality TV like he owned the place. I froze. What the hell happened here? He looked up, smirk on his lips. "You didn't say I had to clean." Rage flared in my chest. "You took advantage of my kindness." I grabbed the empty bottles, marched over, and tossed them in the recycling bin. He stood slowly, looming over me. "You're acting like a bitch," he hissed. That night, I called Emma. "You wanted me to let him stay. I did. Now clean up this mess." "Jake says he's sorry," she said, voice wavering. "But he really needs a place. He's trying to get back on his feet." Trying. I remembered the eviction notice taped to his old apartment door, the court summons, the gambling debts. By Friday morning, I had resolved to stick to my guns. Jake would be out Saturday. No extensions. But when I arrived home after a 10-hour shift, I found the front door ajar. My heart pounded. Stepping in, I saw him on the couch, playing video games. The carpet was stained, the curtains torn, a storm of trash swirled around him. "Get out," I said, voice tight. He paused the game, turned to me with lazy defiance. "You can't kick me out." "Really?" I pointed at my lease agreement posted on the fridge. "I'm the tenant. You're the guest. You're trespassing." "We'll see about that." At 2 a.m., I was jolted awake by a loud crash in the kitchen. I threw on a robe and crept toward the noise, phone in hand. I flicked on the lights to find my favorite coffee maker, shattered, its pieces strewn across the counter. Jake stood there, bottle in hand, eyes glazed. "You owe me for that," he slurred. Without thinking, I lunged forward and grabbed the bottle. He shoved me back. I tumbled into the counter, knocking loose a jar of nuts that cracked against the tile floor. He moved toward me, anger flaring. My chest tightened. I felt trapped. In that moment, something snapped. I raised my voice, yelling his name, calling him out for every lie, every broken promise, every hurt he'd caused Emma and me. words spilled out in a torrent. "You think you can waltz into my home, trash it, disrespect me, and I'll just smile? You treated her like garbage. You treated all of us like garbage, and I'm sick of it." He stood there, stunned, as if for the first time seeing me, not his doormat, not his enabler, but a woman who meant every word. Then he shoved me again and stormed out. The next morning, I found a note on the coffee table. "Fine, leaving, but she's going to pay for this." I felt a chill. Emma called, voice cracking. "He's gone, but he said you ruined his life." My hand trembled as I hung up. My living room was in shambles. My sister was terrified he might retaliate, and I was left wondering whether I'd done the right thing or whether I'd crossed the line I couldn't come back from. What would you do? Would you refuse to let someone who's caused you so much pain into your home, even at the cost of family harmony? Or would you swallow your pride, let him stay, and hope he finally changes? Because the truth is, I don't know if I'm the asshole. But I do know I couldn't live with myself if I let that chaos continue. That night, I lay awake, listening to every creak of the house, every echo in the empty rooms. I recalled all the moments, small kindnesses he'd repaid with sabotage, the promises to change that evaporated like smoke. And in the dark, I made a decision. No going back. But little did I know, letting him go would bring consequences I never anticipated. I didn't sleep a wink that night. Every creak felt like Jake's footsteps. Every gust of wind against the window sounded like his mocking laugh. By sunrise, I was exhausted, but determined. I refused to live in fear. Emma came over early, carrying a duffel bag. Her eyes were red from crying. "He packed some stuff," she said quietly. "He wants to wait here until he figures out what to do next." I shook my head. "No, he's done enough damage." She bit her lip. "He says if he can't stay with you, he'll have to crash on the street. He thinks you're being cruel." It was tempting to relent. I remembered how she used to beam whenever he made her laugh, how she thought he'd finally change after every promise. But that morning, I saw my sister's strength, how she'd grown since breaking up with him, and I knew I had to stand my ground. "I'm not cruel," I told her. "I'm protecting myself and our home." We packed his duffel bag into my car. The bag was heavier than I expected, full of clutter, empty wallets, half-finished notebooks, and crumpled receipts. As I drove him to the edge of town, Jake sat silently in the passenger seat, staring out the window. I resisted the urge to glance over at him to gauge his reaction. At the highway on-ramp, I pulled over. "This is where you get off," I said, voice steady. He turned to face me. His eyes were glossy, but I didn't know if it was anger or something else. Remorse, maybe. "Thanks for the ride," he muttered. "I'll manage." I looked at him for a long moment, then unlocked the car door. "Goodbye, Jake." He opened the door but didn't move. "Emma's worried," he said softly. "Don't make her choose." My heart clenched. I imagined my sister torn between love and loyalty, stuck in the middle of our fight. "That's on her to decide," I said. "She's stronger than you think." He hesitated, then stepped out. The car door closed with a soft click. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, watching him walk down the off-ramp. He looked back once, gave a small nod, and disappeared around the bend. When I got home, the house felt impossibly silent. The shattered coffee maker was still on the counter, shards of glass glinting in the morning sun. I retrieved my grandmother's knitted blanket from the trash and draped it over the couch. Then I gathered the empty beer bottles and piled them neatly in recycling bags. Sweeping up the mess felt cathartic, like reclaiming my space piece by piece. Emma arrived a few hours later. She hugged me tightly in the living room. "I'm sorry for everything,"
she whispered. "Thank you for saving me from him." I kissed her forehead. "You saved me too. We look out for each other." Over the next week, life began to settle. I replaced the coffee maker with a simple French press. I repainted the walls where Jake had scrawled graffiti. I even installed a small security camera by the front door. I wanted to feel safe again. Emma found a therapist to help her process the breakup. She confided in me that beneath the glamour of Jake's promises, she'd felt hollow and anxious. Now, without his constant drama, she started rediscovering hobbies she'd abandoned: painting, yoga, volunteering at the animal shelter. One afternoon, as we sipped iced tea on the back porch, Emma said, "You did the right thing. I know it hurt, but I needed to see he couldn't help me." I smiled, relief washing through me. I just wish he'd get the help he needs. Weeks turned into months. Every time I passed the empty off-ramp where I dropped him off, I wondered what became of Jake. Did he find a place? Did he change? Part of me hoped so. Part of me feared he'd spiral further without boundaries. Then one evening, I received a package at my door. Inside was a letter in Jake's handwriting and a small, battered journal. I hesitated before opening it. The journal was filled with scribbled confessions, pages of apologies, of admissions that he'd manipulated Emma, that he'd resented me for standing up to him, that he'd hidden his deaths because he was ashamed. At the end of the journal, a final entry read, "I never learned boundaries until she showed me what they meant. I'm starting therapy. I don't know if I'll ever be the man she believed I could be, but I owe it to her to try. And to you for refusing to let me ruin your home. Thank you." I read and reread the note, tears welling up. It wasn't a Hollywood ending. Jake still had miles to go. But it was a start. He'd felt the consequences of his actions, and maybe, just maybe, he'd change. That night I called Emma. "He wrote," I said, voice thick. "He says he's in therapy." Emma let out a breath I could almost hear through the phone. "That's a miracle." I paused. I think we both needed to see what losing him would mean. She agreed. "I'm proud of you. Proud of us." We talked late into the night. About forgiveness, about trust, about how boundaries aren't walls, but bridges built on respect. And sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that lead to the greatest healing. So, was I the asshole? I refused to be. I stood up for myself, for Emma, and for our right to peace. And though it cost us a relationship, it gave us something far more valuable: respect. If you ever find yourself torn between kindness and your own well-being, remember this: letting someone in doesn't mean letting them destroy you. Sometimes the bravest act of love is knowing when to close the door and having the strength to keep it shut. What would you do in my place? Let me know in the comments below.